Andrew Doran, Executive Director of JBY Minerals. We're a Canadian-focused lithium explorer who are focused on large-scale discoveries in the James Bay region of Quebec. We have just under 35,000 square hectares of prospective lithium projects on the premium Legrand greenstone belt in the James Bay region.
Good to have you on board. We've not met or spoken before, so might go for an overview of you and the team first, if you don't mind. So what's your background, Andrew? Where have you come from? What have you done?
Yeah, so I've got a business background, worked in project delivery, mainly commercial, senior commercial roles for near on 2 decades, mid-tier major mining organisations, worked in the lithium space for Tianqi Lithium and set up their commercial execution strategy for their hydroxide plant in Kwinana in Perth, Western Australia, and spent some time at Pilbara Minerals leading the project's commercial team there as well. We've got a really experienced board, so Gerardo Donovan, our non-executive chair, he was previously the managing director of Patriot Metals, also spent a significant amount of time in Pilbara Minerals. I think it was near on 6 years, where he led the phase 1 processing plant into production and the integration of Outet into the existing Pilbara Minerals business. On the Canadian side, we've got Judy Baker, who's a non-exec director. She is a geologist and led the discovery of the Wabuchi asset that Namaste Lithium owned, and where she spent 8 years. And our other non-exec director is Dita Segovic, who was the chief operating officer and founding director of Primero Group, which is one of the industry leaders globally in the construction side of lithium projects.
So what's the plan? What do you want to do?
Oh, we want to have a major discovery. That's what we want to do. So we kind of been on the journey for a few years to get to where we are today. We've really scoured the world, looking at all the different deposits, the intricacies of all of them, the jurisdictions that they sit within, and then we really landed on the James Bay region, and because we want to have a large discovery, something that is going to have scale and really stand the test of time when it goes through into production. Okay,
and so let's start at the beginning. So tell us about the asset you've picked up. How did you pick it up? What do you know about it?
Yeah, so previously we really went through a global search, and we landed on 2 key jurisdictions that have the right geological makeup for these giant deposits that are in safe jurisdictions, and that was the Pilbara and Western Australia, and then the James Bay region in Quebec. And those 3 key ingredients that we look for was that they sit within the right Neo-Archean rock age on large to giant deformation zones. So the larger the deformation zone, the larger the pegmatite that can sit within it. And we've got deformation zones up to 1 kilometre wide. So that's super exciting, which sits also on the trend that Patriot sit within. And given that they're having 200-300 metre intercepts, that's kind of the similar kind of setup that we're looking for. And so when we looked at WA, Western Australia is an extremely tight and securely held region for premium assets. And the James Bay region, we've seen that as quite unexplored, and there was a lot of upside there. So we really focused over there as we see that can develop into a Pilbara-style region in the next decade.
Okay, so that's kind of the what you've got. But now, obviously, there's a fair bit of interest in lithium and lithium pegmatites. It's the phrase of the year, I think. And therefore, a fair bit of competition around. So you've kind of, what are the kind of key drivers for you? What's important for you to do? You know, for some it might be moving through the phases quickly, or some it might be just setting this up for someone to kind of come in and take over. What's your actual plan or exit?
So our team has a significant development background. And so when we acquired the assets from the vendor, they chose us due to our development experience. So the vendor is our exploration team in country, and that's where we've got the skills to get on the ground. And actually, we were fortunate enough that we're actually able to get on the ground instantly and really get cut through in Quebec. And we're there to provide the guidance and support from the corporate side. And then should and when we have a discovery is to hopefully bring that into a producing asset.
Right, okay. It's kind of interesting in terms of how companies are going to have to try and distinguish themselves and differentiate themselves. And your kind of development and kind of commercials and everything. side of things is interesting and a very sort of technical metal for sure. And maybe we can come back to that if you don't mind, because I think that's sort of fascinating. Because there's not too much experience on that side out there. It's very much on the exploration. But talking about exploration, you've got a bit of money. How are you going to be deploying it? And what are you getting after?
Yeah, so we've spent about 8 weeks on the ground initially.
Yeah.
And initially it was a lot of aerial surveys, field prospecting, channel sampling, rock chip sampling and that. So we've actually had quite a successful 8 weeks, uncovered 2 large fields of pegmatites and have had discovered spodumene in one of them. So what we'll then be going to look to plan into next year is how we're then going to further explore these recent discoveries, and then also get across our other 2 northern properties, being Aqua and Jewel, as there's been some significant discoveries made, or one significant discovery on the border of our Aqua property, and really get out and get a full understanding of those 3 properties.
Right. Okay. And therein, I guess that's a challenge for juniors just starting out. You must be the youngest company we've talked to. Is that allocation of capital and the judicious use of that capital. You've got three assets in the shape of Air, Aqua, and Jewel. In terms of the weighting of that, can you give me some sense of that? Because it can be a liability if you've got too much to do and not enough money, right?
Originally the focus was Jewel, because that was our flagship asset. That had ticked all the boxes and more for the geological features. I mentioned the 1 kilometre wide deformation zones. That asset had all of that. Aero and Aqua, very similar, but not at that level. However, since we've been on the ground, we've had we've made significant progress with Aeros, where we've uncovered that. So we really want to understand what we've uncovered at Aero. So there'll be desktop studies and that to look into that. And that potentially will lead to a drill program on that particular asset, because that is something we've uncovered in the first 8 weeks. However, we've strategized and we've got key priority targets across the other ones that we'll look to hit to ensure that we're basically using our money wisely and hitting the key priority areas rather than taking a full asset approach.
Right, okay. And what are your obligations under the deal that you've done with regards to the assets? What are you obliged to spend over what time frame?
We don't have any spend obligations on us for that asset. So we can pretty much do as we please.
Okay. So you're currently 100% owners then?
100%, yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, well,
yeah.
That makes life a lot easier. And with regards
100% owners, vendors own 10% of the company. They're also the exploration company, so they're extremely incentivized themselves to see that this builds into a successful business. So just another key component in ensuring that you have a successful business is having everyone incentivized.
It's kind of a good point, because they've been there a while. They know their way around. They're not sort of learning on the job, on your dime, as it were. And what's it like there in terms of access to equipment and in terms of drills and all of that kind of good stuff? Because it's been a sort of tough time over in Canada with costs, inflation, etc. How are you feeling about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it links back to having incentivized vendors as well, because obviously having a roughly 10% equity interest in a business, they're going to want to see that the capital is spent wisely. So with them having, I think, combined 60 years experience in Quebec, it's really allowed us to get cut through from a pricing perspective and also access to the best contractors. We're not getting treated as an ASX listed company coming into Canada. We're getting treated as a Canadian-based company because of the team we already have existing in country.
Right, okay. And give me a little, again, just so there's a kind of exercise of trying to understand you guys, and because we're not, we've not spoken before, but you're Aussies, you've gone to Canada, and yet Australia produces 50% of the world's lithium. Why Canada for you, if you had a chance to kind of look around and choose?
Well, I think it's the only other tier 1 jurisdiction globally that has these giant deposits, and also the government incentives to be in that region. So in Canada, and in particular in Quebec, every dollar we spend, we're getting roughly 40 cents back, up to 40 cents back in critical minerals tax rebates. So $1 million in the ground, $400,000 back. That's significant for a junior. We also have access to what they call flow-through funding, which allows us to raise at a premium while only diluting shareholders by approximately half. So you can raise 10 million and only dilute by 5. And then also what the government...
You better explain for some of the Aussies out there in terms of the other benefits of the flow-through, in terms of what it gets you.
In terms of...
Well, in terms of, obviously it's going to be spent, money, flow-through is going to be spent in the ground.
In the ground, correct.
Not sort of G&A.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so all the funding raised through flow-through funding has to go into the ground. It's heavily audited, obviously, but that really allows... It's encouraging companies to come into Canada, spend money on exploring, and hopefully prove up significant resources so that they can develop their own mining capabilities in country, and then also feed some of these significant downstream facilities that the government is funding at the moment. You've got the likes of Northvolt and POSCO just out of Montreal, building huge facilities, lots of grant funding coming from the government, and there will be a need for the minerals up in that northern James Bay region to feed some of these plants.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Right. And tell me a little bit about the kind of the share register as well. I mean, who's in there? Is it mainly retail or?
So we've got got funds in there. So I think that share registers, they've got a top 20 of about 70%, with 40% of that held by management, board and vendors. So really incentivized, which again, hugely important in ensuring that the business has the right drivers. It's not a lifestyle company. We're obviously pushing it towards success and hopefully making a discovery. I mentioned that the top 20 was 70%. There's 60.5 million shares on issue, no options, only some performance rights for the vendors. So a really clean structure, which will allow it to have its natural progression as we update the market with positive news.
Right. Okay. And I kind of glazed over the fact that you obviously got up some money. Remind us how much money, and again, just in terms of dollars or meters or however you're allocating that money, gives us a sense of that.
Yeah. So there's $4.3 million that we have as of the last quarter. Majority of that is going into the Legrand project in the north, which we've touched on quite a bit. How exactly that is going to be spent next year on those properties is really going to be determined by the data that we've just generated out of our maiden field program. So what comes out of those aerial surveys, the field program we ran, and some of the other interesting activities in the areas from other companies will really dictate how we split that up between the 3 properties. But yeah, we plan on being quite frugal and smart with that money.
Right. Okay. And if you don't mind, just a sense of the kind of the macro at the moment. Clearly there's some deals happening. You're seeing OEMs, battery manufacturers moving upstream, taking positions in companies. As I referenced earlier, it is a very sort of technical metal, and typically, historically, certainly it's been, you can't do too much without Chinese technology help in there. How are you seeing the market panning out at the moment? And I know it's early days for you, but you've got to have a sort of sense of how you guide yourself and navigate through what is a fairly sort of nascent industry in many ways.
The macro market is a real interesting one, especially at the moment. We've got a significant M&A hot market happening in the Pilbara in Western Australia at the moment, where we're seeing, well, not just in the Pilbara, all of Western Australia, where we're seeing a big takeover bid from Albemarle on Liontown, and also a similar size takeover bid on Azure by SQM. Now, how does that fit into the whole macro market is these 2 entities are basically being pushed out of Chile in the next five or so years as they're nationalising lithium, and they've looked to divert their capital and their investment into Australia. Now, a couple of the high net wealth Australians have said, hang on a minute, we're looking to diversify out of iron ore and accumulate more lithium assets here. And they're basically, one of them is kind of been blocked in the Liontown one, so Albemarle's pulled out. And now we're not sure how the Azure SQM particular takeover is going to happen, but you've got two large Australian entities in there now with 35% of the register. You can see that they're going to exit as well. So with that, there's really going to be a focus on other regions in the world. You're not going to go to Africa because Africa has a huge black cloud over it. Just look at the issues with AVZ. South America, Chile, as I mentioned, the only other region is James Bay and Quebec. And from a macro perspective, that's where everyone's focus will switch, whether it's now 6 months, 2 years. And we've strategically positioned ourselves there as we feel it's early days and everyone will catch up to that region. Although Patriot is got a big magnifying glass on that particular area. And we're close to the US market, which has been left behind by China in the last lithium run. And China are 10 years ahead. So in order to secure a supply to feed the American and Canadian markets, it's going to have to come from Canada, and the largest scale resources are going to come out of James Bay. So we're really confident that sitting in the James Bay area is the best spot to be because there's scale, whereas some of the other smaller type assets, which you will find in Ontario and other states in Canada, may not have that scale and struggle when it comes to price fluctuations.
Okay, interesting times for explorers coming into the space. Appreciate you coming on board today and talking us through where you're at. We'll follow you very closely with great interest. Exciting space, lithium at the moment. And best of luck with everything that you do.
Thanks very much, Matthew. Appreciate it.